the vast majority of people in these regions have never really felt Russian. They're certainly not treated as Russians in a country that's overwhelmingly prejudiced to its Muslim minorities. And they've always been extremely uncomfortable with their status in the country. And I think since the fall of the Soviet Union, much as you have here in the South Caucasus with Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, in the North Caucasus as well, you have more questions around, well, who are we now? Now we're out of the Soviet Union. Our sense of national identity needs to change. And you had the insurrection in Chechnya, war of independence there. Dagestan was pulled into similar kind of confrontations, although to some extent never to the same kind of degree. But there's always been a history of anti-government insurrection and indeed of terror. And I think while a lot of people will look at what happens in the North Caucasus and think North Caucasians, Dagestanis, Chechens, their antipathy to the government is extremely valid. I think very few will think that targeting civilians or attacking churches or synagogues is the right way to go about that. But historically, that has been one of the only opportunities kind of available to these communities.
3 days of mourning have been declared in Russia's northern Caucasus region of Dagestan after an attack by gunmen on a church, a synagogue, and a police post. The death toll from the attacks has risen to 20, and Russia's investigative committee has said that at least 15 police officers died, amongst several civilians, including an Orthodox priest. Gabriel Gavin is a reporter with Politico who's currently in Armenia, and he told me more about what's been happening.
Well, it's certainly been a bloody few hours in the North Caucasus, one of Russia's southernmost regions. At least 19 people have been confirmed to have died in a string of attacks, 3 that we know of, one on a synagogue, one on a church, and one on a station belonging to the traffic police. And at the moment, nobody has taken responsibility for these killings. Nobody has taken responsibility for, these attacks that I think the footage from the scenes, the pictures of the destruction and devastation are really shocking. And yet there's not a terrorist organization that's come forward to take responsibility for them just yet. There's been a lot of speculation that ISIS could be responsible, having had some operations in the region in the past, but have not taken responsibility as they would normally. However, that said, what we've seen in the last couple of months has been a really sharp and unexpected spike in terrorism inside Russia. It was only in March that there was the Crocus City concert hall shooting in Moscow that left hundreds dead. And there has been a sneaking suspicion for, I think, a long time among analysts and even critical Russian voices that actually the security services are so distracted and overstretched with their catastrophic invasion of Ukraine that they've taken the eye off the ball closer to home. And the North Caucasus, Dagestan, Chechnya, for decades, these for Russians have been synonymous with terrorism, with insurrection and with violence. So I think there's a real concern inside the country now that people just aren't safe, and it's the responsibility of the authorities to keep them safe, and they're not doing it.
Certainly, it does look as though these attacks in Dagestan were a coordinated wave.
Yeah, I think whenever you have a series of attacks committed effectively within the same hour and a half period, there's always going to be, the first assumption is that they're connected, of course. But I think it's really unclear exactly why someone has chosen these particular targets. If you're going to be sophisticated enough to have a terrorist cell, why would you choose a synagogue, a church, and a traffic police station? These are kind of odd targets in many ways. And I think the fact that there hasn't been anybody immediately claiming responsibility will kind of further add to the intrigue. But I think while Russia is obviously going to move quickly to say, well, it's the fault of the Ukrainians or it's the fault of the Americans, the simplest, least conspiratorial, most sensible answer is that these regions have been deeply troubled in the past, and it seems that we're moving towards them being deeply troubled again. And really, when you think about the reasons behind that deteriorating security situation, the Kremlin only has itself to blame.
Yeah, we've seen that an Orthodox priest was amongst those killed. For people listening who maybe are not clear about Dagestan, its significance. I mean, this is an area right down in the south of Russia where there has been unrest, where there is a Muslim minority population, and where there have been terrorist incidents in the past.
Well, the North Caucasus, as that entire region from Chechnya to Dagestan through to Adygea on the Black Sea coast, it was brutally suppressed in the 1800s. It was conquered, forcefully subjugated as part of Russia's empire, and at the expense of a huge number of local communities, people were effectively genocided. I mean, there was the Circassian genocide. There was a genocide against Chechens, against Dagestanis, and it's long had a troubled relationship with Russia, which I think for the majority of people, despite having had kind of Kremlin-appointed authorities imposed over them, the vast majority of people in these regions have never really felt Russian. They're certainly not treated as Russians in a country that's overwhelmingly prejudiced to its Muslim minorities. And they've always been extremely uncomfortable with their status in the country. And I think since the fall of the Soviet Union, much as you have here in the South Caucasus with Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, in the North Caucasus as well, you have more questions around, well, who are we now? Now we're out of the Soviet Union. Our sense of national identity needs to change. And you had the insurrection in Chechnya, war of independence there. Dagestan was pulled into similar kind of confrontations, although to some extent never to the same kind of degree. But there's always been a history of anti-government insurrection and indeed of terror. And I think while a lot of people will look at what happens in the North Caucasus and think North Caucasians, Dagestanis, Chechens, their antipathy to the government is extremely valid. I think very few will think that targeting civilians or attacking churches or synagogues is the right way to go about that. But historically, that has been one of the only opportunities kind of available to these communities.
It is, though, an embarrassment, isn't it, for President Putin, who has put so much store by providing security for the Russian people?
Well, what's the point in being a strong man when you don't look so strong? I mean, if your argument is that Russians have to give up the right to free speech, the right to free assembly, the right to use international banks and whatever else, and effectively become cut off from the world for your safety, for your security, because everyone else wants to harm you, only Putin can protect you. It's increasingly becoming clear that actually he can't, and he is failing to keep a handle on the security situation at home. I think March's attacks in Moscow made that very clear, and I think it's extremely unsurprising that we're going to continue to see exactly these kinds of bloody incidents.
Gabriel Gavin, a reporter with Politico, speaking to me just a little earlier about those attacks in Dagestan. Now, thanks to all of you listening who've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Do keep them coming in. Alistair, great to hear that you're enjoying the show.